I sat alone in that damp, musty basement office, staring at the peeling ceiling above me. The smell of mold and old paint stung my nose, and I could hear rats scuttling behind the walls. I had gone from being the trusted head of human resources, the woman who trained 3 generations of employees, to a glorified ghost in the building, buried in a room nobody used, with no team, no window, and no respect. My desk had been shoved into a corner near an old boiler. No computer, no phone, not even my name on the door, just a dented metal file cabinet that looked older than me. And that's when it happened. Out of boredom or desperation, I pulled open one of the drawers in that forgotten cabinet. Inside was a thick envelope, sealed, yellowed with age, my name written on the front in handwriting. I hadn't seen in over a decade. It was from Richard Whitman, the original founder, the man I had worked for when this company meant something. As I opened it, my hands trembling, I had no idea that what I would read next would flip the entire company upside down and reveal a truth so powerful it would bring Brad Callahan to his knees. 22 years. That's how long I'd given to Whitson Design Group. More than half my life dedicated to a vision I believed in with every fiber of my being. I wasn't just the head of HR, I was the keeper of the company's soul. Richard Whitman hired me when I was fresh out of college, starry-eyed and eager to prove myself. "Rachel," he said during my interview, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners, "resumes tell me what people can do. I want to know who they are." That was Richard, always looking beyond credentials to find the heart of a person. Under his leadership, Whitson grew from a small design firm operating out of a converted warehouse into an industry powerhouse with 300 employees. But unlike other companies that lost their humanity as they expanded, we kept ours. Richard made sure of it. Growth without values is just cancer, he would say at company meetings. He believed in fair wages, flexible schedules for parents, and a workplace where people felt safe bringing their whole selves to work. This wasn't just corporate speak. Richard lived these values. When my mother was diagnosed with cancer, he personally rearranged my schedule so I could take her to treatments. No paperwork, no HR rigmarole, just human decency. Over the years, I became his right hand. I helped design our cultural framework, led our training programs, and eventually joined the senior leadership team. My office sat just down the hall from his, and our morning coffee chats became ritual. We talked about everything, from candidates to strategies to his beloved Red Sox. He never married and had no children. The company was his family, and somehow, I had become something like a daughter to him. "You know, Rachel," he said once after we'd navigated a particularly difficult merger, "some people build companies with brick and steel. I built mine with trust and talent. You understand that better than anyone." The day everything changed started like any other Tuesday. Spring sunshine streamed through the windows of our Chicago office. I had just finished conducting a leadership workshop when my assistant burst in, face pale as paper. "Rachel, come quick. It's Richard." The charity 5K race, the unexpected rainstorm, the slick road, and the driver who lost control. Just like that, Richard Whitman was gone. At 68 years old, he had been in perfect health, still swimming laps every morning before work. The suddenness of it felt like a cruel joke. The funeral was a blur of black suits and hushed voices. I delivered a eulogy that I barely remember writing. Hundreds came. Employees past and present, clients, competitors who respected him, even the custodial staff who worked the night shift. Richard had touched them all. "What happens now?" people kept asking me, as if I held the answers. I didn't. None of us did. 2 weeks later, the board called an emergency meeting. Richard's will had been read, and a successor named. I assumed it would be Joanna Mercer, our brilliant COO, who had been with the company almost as long as I had. Or perhaps they would bring in someone from outside who shared Richard's values. I was wrong on both counts. "Bradley Callahan," announced Martin Reeves, the board chairman, with a strained smile that didn't reach his eyes. Richard's stepson from his brief marriage to Patricia Callahan in the 90s. Richard's will specifically names him as successor. The room fell silent, then erupted. "Brad Callahan? The Instagram guy?" someone whispered. "Doesn't he run some kind of lifestyle blog?" asked another. I sat there, stunned into silence. I knew of Brad, of course. Richard had mentioned him occasionally, always with a complicated mix of obligation and disappointment. Brad was the son of Richard's late ex-wife, a marriage that had lasted less than 2 years when Richard was in his 50s. Though they weren't biologically related and had divorced decades ago, Richard had maintained some contact and helped fund Brad's education. But naming him CEO? It made no sense. Brad Callahan was 31, with no relevant industry experience and a reputation for lavish parties in his downtown penthouse. His social media portrayed him as a lifestyle entrepreneur and digital thought leader, though nobody could quite explain what products or thoughts he actually produced. I understand this comes as a surprise, Martin continued, looking uncomfortable, but the clause in Richard's will was quite specific. Brad will assume the role of CEO effective immediately. And just like that, our world turned upside down. Brad arrived the following Monday in a sleek Italian suit and shoes that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He didn't walk into the building. He swept in, trailed by an entourage of equally polished young people tapping on tablets. The first town hall, meeting under his leadership was held that same afternoon. Attendance was mandatory. We gathered in the large conference center, the same space where, just 1 month earlier, Richard had celebrated the company's 20th anniversary. First, let me say how deeply saddened I am by Richard's passing, Brad began, pacing the stage with microphone in hand. His voice carried none of the warmth that had been Richard's trademark. He was a visionary, for his time. That pause, those 3 words, for his time, spoken with such casual dismissal. I felt my chest tighten. But times change, markets evolve, and Whitsun must evolve too. For the next 40 minutes, Brad outlined his vision for what he called Whitsun 2.0, a complete rebranding, a pivot toward digital-first design, a leaner, more agile approach that would trim the legacy fat, corporate speak for layoffs. I watched the faces around me fall, one by one, as they realized what was coming. By the end of his presentation, Brad had effectively declared war on everything Richard had built. Not through malice, but something worse, indifference. He simply didn't value the culture that had been cultivated over decades. As people filed out, murmuring anxiously to one another, Brad caught my eye across the room. He smiled, a flash of perfect teeth, and started walking toward me. "Rachel, right?" he said, extending his hand. "Richard mentioned you. You've been here forever, haven't you?" "Forever." Like I was a piece of outdated furniture. 22 years, I replied, forcing a smile. "I look forward to helping with the transition." Brad's smile widened. "Great, about that. I'd like to meet with you tomorrow morning, 9 sharp. We should discuss your role moving forward." As he walked away, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. In that moment, I knew everything was about to change, and not for the better. The next morning, I arrived at the office at my usual time, 7:30 a.m. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night updating my resume for the first time in 2 decades, just in case. The halls were quiet, most employees not due for another hour. I used the time to center myself, reviewing notes from my tenure, gathering documentation of our most successful HR initiatives. If Brad wanted to discuss my role, I would be prepared to demonstrate my value. At precisely 9 a.m., I knocked on Richard's office door, Brad's office now, though it felt wrong to even think it. "Come in," called an unfamiliar voice. I pushed open the door and stopped short. The office had been transformed overnight. Richard's warm cherry desk was gone, replaced by a minimalist glass monstrosity. The bookshelves that once held industry references and employee recognition awards now displayed sleek art pieces in what appeared to be a limited edition sneaker collection. Richard's beloved Boston fern, the one I'd watered during his vacations for years, was nowhere to be seen. Brad sat behind the desk, flanked by 2 young men and a woman, all dressed in matching black outfits that looked more appropriate for a nightclub than a workplace. "Rachel, right on time, old school, punctuality. I dig it," Brad said, not bothering to stand. "Meet the core team. This is Zach, my chief innovation officer, Mia, head of brand experience, and Tyler, my executive strategist." None of them looked older than 25. None offered credentials. "Please sit." Brad gestured to a chair across from his desk. It was lower than his by design, I realized, a power move straight out of Business Manipulation 101. "I've been reviewing our organizational structure," Brad began, swiping through screens on a tablet. "Lots of interesting choices by the previous administration." "By Richard, you mean?" I said quietly. Brad's eyes flicked up to mine, a flash of annoyance crossing his face before the practiced smile returned. "Right, Uncle Richard. Anyway, we're implementing some Changes effective immediately. The HR department as it currently exists is, he paused, searching for a word, outdated. Outdated? I repeated, my stomach dropping. We just redesigned our entire talent acquisition strategy last quarter. Our retention rates are 40% above industry average. Brad waved his hand dismissively. Retention is an old paradigm. The future is fluid talent. Project-based collaboration. The gig mindset. The woman, Mia, nodded enthusiastically. We're bringing in Velocity partners to handle our people operations. They're amazing. They did Tech Fusion's culture reboot last year. Tech Fusion laid off 30% of their staff 3 months later, I pointed out. Tyler snorted. Exactly. Efficiency. I took a deep breath. Brad, I understand you want to make, changes. But our people are our greatest asset. Richard always— Look, Brad interrupted, leaning forward. I appreciate your loyalty to my stepdad. Really, it's touching. But this isn't 1999 anymore. We're restructuring, downsizing certain legacy departments. You're eliminating HR, I said flatly. Not eliminating. Reimagining. We'll have a small talent team. Very small. Mostly AI-driven. Actually, super efficient. And my role in this reimagining? Brad exchanged glances with his team. Zach suppressed a smirk. We value your institutional knowledge, Rachel. Really. That's why we're creating a special position for you. Senior Documentation Specialist. Documentation Specialist, I repeated slowly. What exactly would that entail? Basically, we need someone to document all the, old processes. Create a knowledge base for historical purposes. Translation. Write down everything you know so we can fire you once we've extracted all value. And where would this position be located? I asked, though I already suspected the answer wouldn't be good. We're converting this floor to an open concept creative space, Brad said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. Your new workspace will be on the lower level. Temporary, of course, while the transition happens. The lower level. The basement storage area where broken furniture and forgotten trade show materials went to die. I see. My voice sounded calm, though inside I was screaming. And my team? We've already spoken with them this morning. Most positions have been eliminated, though we've offered. Garcia and Tina roles on the new talent team, reporting to Mia, of course. Garcia and Tina, my newest hires, the only ones under 30. When does this take effect? I asked, my hands gripping my portfolio so tightly my knuckles had gone white. Brad smiled brightly. Immediately. We've already had IT adjust access credentials. Zach will walk you to your new space after this. I sat there, processing. 22 years of loyalty. Countless weekends worked. Relationships built. All dismissed in a 10-minute meeting by someone who'd been with the company less than a week. Unless, Brad added, watching me carefully, you'd prefer to tender your resignation. We could arrange a farewell happy hour. Small severance, clean break. He wanted me to quit. Of course he did. If I resigned, they wouldn't have to pay unemployment or risk an age discrimination lawsuit. I thought about it for approximately 3 seconds, then straightened my spine. I look forward to documenting our institutional knowledge, I said evenly. When would you like me to begin? Brad looked momentarily surprised, then recovered. Great. That's great. Zach can show you to your office now. Workspace. Zach corrected with a smirk. We don't do offices anymore. The workspace was worse than I'd imagined. A forgotten room next to the building's boiler, it had clearly been used for storage until very recently. Dust outlines on the floor showed where boxes had been hastily removed. The desk was an old metal teacher's desk from the 70s, the chair a cast-off with a cracked vinyl seat. A single, fluorescent light buzzed overhead, flickering every few seconds. The room smelled of mildew and something metallic. Bathrooms down the hall, Zach said, not bothering to hide his amusement. Wi-Fi's spotty down here, but you probably won't need it much, right? Just holler if you need anything. He turned to leave, then stopped. Oh, and Brad wanted me to let you know there's an all-hands at 4 to announce the reorganization. Attendance is optional for transition positions. After he left, I stood alone in the dim room, allowing myself exactly 1 minute to feel the full weight of the humiliation. 1 minute to let the tears well up. 1 minute of raw, unadulterated anger. Then I sat down at the desk, pulled out my notebook, and began to plan. They thought they'd broken me. They had. No idea who they were dealing with. Days bled into weeks in my basement exile. I established a routine of sorts, Arrive early, document processes no one would ever read, eat lunch alone at my desk, leave precisely at 5 p.m. My new role came with no meetings, no team interactions, no purpose beyond waiting for the inevitable pink slip. The building felt different now. In the 6 weeks since Brad's takeover, Whitson had undergone a transformation that went beyond mere rebranding. The warm, collaborative atmosphere had been replaced by something frenetic and cold. The halls buzzed with whispered conversations that stopped when footsteps approached. People who had worked together for years now competed for shrinking resources and recognition from the new regime. I learned about changes through company-wide emails. First came the new logo, a sharp-edged monstrosity that looked like every other tech startup's insignia. Then the name change, from Whitson Design Group to simply WHT, because apparently full words were passé. The mission statement Richard had crafted so carefully, creating designs that enhance human connection, was scrapped in favor of disrupting visual paradigms. Each morning, I walked through a lobby I barely recognized. The reception desk where Gloria had greeted visitors for 15 years was gone, replaced by a self-check-in kiosk. The community wall showcasing employee milestones had been painted over to make room for an installation of neon tubes that spelled out, "Hustle harder." Familiar faces disappeared with alarming frequency. Joanna Mercer, our brilliant COO, decided to pursue other opportunities after a heated argument with Brad over budget allocations. Thomas from accounting was replaced by an outsourced firm. The entire customer service team was consolidated, mostly eliminated, in favor of a chatbot solution. When I passed former colleagues in the hallway or cafeteria, their reactions varied. Some avoided eye contact entirely, as if my demotion might be contagious. Others offered sympathetic smiles but kept their distance. A brave few stopped to chat, voices lowered, asking how I was holding up. "I'm fine," I'd say, because what else could I say? That I spent my days in a basement office typing up processes for a company that no longer existed? That sometimes I could hear Brad's entourage laughing as they passed the stairwell, and I wondered if they were laughing about me. Maria from the design team was one of the few who sought me out regularly. "It's chaos up there, Rachel," she confided one afternoon, perching cautiously on the edge of my desk. "They've hired all these consultants who know nothing about our clients. Projects are falling behind. 3 accounts have already pulled their business." I nodded, unsurprised. "How are you holding up?" Maria sighed. "They've got us hot desking now. No assigned workspaces. It's supposed to foster creativity, but really it's just lonely. Nobody has photos of their kids anymore. No plants, no personality. And Brad? Hardly ever there. Always off at some conference or vision retreat. When he is around, he's hosting these bizarre meetings, where we all stand in a circle and share our disruptive insights. Last week, he made the entire creative team do trust falls. I tried to picture Richard making anyone do trust falls. The absurdity almost made me laugh. "It won't last," Maria said, lowering her voice further. "The way they're burning cash on renovations and consultants while losing clients, the numbers don't add up." She was right, of course, but cold comfort doesn't warm a basement office. After Maria left, I turned back to my work, cataloging the company's mentorship program, a Richard initiative that had paired new hires with experienced employees. The program had resulted in our highest retention rates ever. Now it was just another document for the digital archive, another piece of Whitson's legacy being systematically erased. As I typed, my gaze kept drifting to the old filing cabinet shoved against the wall. It had been there since my first day in the basement, a hulking metal relic probably older than most of Brad's team. I'd largely ignored it, assuming it contained ancient payroll records or obsolete tax forms. But that day, something about it caught my attention. A small tag on the middle drawer, yellowed with age. I squinted to make it out in the dim light. R.W. Personal. R.W. Richard Whitman. My heart skipped. I pushed back from my desk and crossed to the cabinet. The drawer stuck at first, metal groaning in protest. When it finally opened, the smell of old paper wafted out. Inside were dozens of folders, meticulously labeled in Richard's distinctive handwriting. Foundation. Proposals. Board Minutes 1999-2003. Acquisition Strategy. I ran my fingers along the folders, a lump forming in my throat. Here was Richard's legacy, gathering dust in a forgotten basement while his company was dismantled above. I began pulling folders at random, flipping through documents that chronicled Whitson's early years. Handwritten notes on legal pads, sketches of the original logo, Photos from the first office. Richard and 3 designers crammed into a space barely bigger than my current basement room. In one folder labeled Personal, I found birthday cards from employees, newspaper clippings about company achievements, and a handwritten letter from a client whose small business had thrived after Richard designed their branding pro bono. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than resignation. I felt connected to the Whitson that had been, the company built on values, not vanity. As I prepared to close the drawer, something caught my eye. At the very back, partially hidden behind the hanging folders, was an envelope, thick, sealed, my name written across the front in Richard's unmistakable script. My hands trembled as I reached for it. The envelope felt substantial, weighted with more than just paper. For a long moment, I just stared at it, heart pounding. Why would Richard leave me a letter? And why here, in this forgotten cabinet? Taking a deep breath, I carefully broke the seal and opened the envelope. Inside were several documents. On top was a letter, dated 13 months before Richard's death. Dear Rachel, it began. If you're reading, this 2 things have happened. I'm no longer with you and something has gone wrong at Whitson. I've hidden this letter where I believe only you would find it, in the old filing cabinet from our first office. The one you insisted we keep for sentimental reasons when we moved to the Michigan Avenue building. I've always prided myself on being a good judge of character. It's why Whitson succeeded, where others failed. But I've made one significant misjudgment in my life, and I fear it may threaten everything we've built. My ex-wife's son, Bradley, is not what he appears to be. Patricia wanted him included in my will, and in a moment of weakness, or perhaps misplaced obligation, I agreed to a small provision. What I did not agree to was Brad assuming leadership of Whitson. Ever. If Brad has somehow gained control of the company, it means the official will present it after my death has been altered. The authentic will, with my true succession plan, is included with this letter, as is documentation of questionable financial activities Brad has been involved with, activities I began investigating shortly before writing this. You've been my most trusted colleague, Rachel. More than that, you've been family, the daughter I never had. It's why the authentic will names you as my successor, with Joanna as COO, and a carefully structured transition plan for leadership. Take these documents to Harriet Chen at Chen & Michaels Law. She has the original copy of my will in her secure files. I've also enclosed a letter to the board, to be opened only in Harriet's presence. Whitson is more than a company. It's a community, a legacy. I trust you to protect it. With love and faith, Richard, I sat back, stunned. My mind raced through implications, possibilities, fears. If what Richard claimed was true, Brad had somehow falsified Richard's will, committed fraud, stolen a company. But why would Richard hide this letter instead of simply updating his official will? And why wait until after his death for this to come to light? The answer lay in the remaining documents. Financial records showing Brad had embezzled from a previous employer. Evidence he'd been investigated for securities fraud. Most damning of all, emails between Brad and a private investigator discussing how to find and destroy all copies of Richard's will except the one Brad had amended. Richard hadn't updated his will because he was gathering evidence, building a case. He hadn't anticipated dying before that work was complete. Now it was up to me. I carefully returned everything to the envelope, then slipped it into my bag. For the first time in weeks, I felt something stir within me, something beyond resignation and hurt, a sense of purpose, of righteous anger. Brad hadn't just taken my job and my dignity. He'd stolen Richard's legacy, the company hundreds of people had poured their hearts into building. As I left the basement that evening, I took one last look at the dingy room that had been my prison. Tomorrow, I would take the documents to Harriet Chen. Tomorrow, everything would change. But first, I had one stop to make. Harriet Chen's office occupied the 22nd floor of a sleek, downtown high-rise, all glass, chrome, and quiet efficiency. I sat in the reception area, clutching my bag containing Richard's documents, my heart racing. After 6 weeks of basement exile, I felt oddly conspicuous in the elegant space, as if my recent humiliation had somehow marked me visibly. Ms. Chen will see you now, the receptionist announced, gesturing toward a corner office with panoramic views of the city. Harriet Chen looked exactly as I'd expected from Richard's descriptions. No nonsense, impeccably dressed, with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. She rose from behind her desk as I entered, extending her hand. Rachel Whitman, she said, a statement rather than a question. Richard spoke highly of you. Very highly. I blinked at the use of Richard's surname with my first name, a mistake people occasionally made given our close professional relationship. But before I could correct her, Harriet gestured for me to sit. I've been expecting you, she continued, resuming her seat. Though I confess, I thought you might come sooner. You knew I would come? Harriet's expression softened slightly. Richard and I were friends for over 30 years. He told me where he'd hidden the letter, said you'd find it if things went sideways with his stepson. I pulled the envelope from my bag and placed it on her desk. Then you know what's in here. I know Richard prepared for contingencies. I know he worried about Bradley Callahan's character, and I know, she tapped a desk drawer meaningfully, that I have the original notarized copy of his will, the real one. Relief flooded through me. So we can prove Brad falsified the will. We can remove him immediately. Harriet held up a hand. It's not quite that simple. May I? She gestured to the envelope. I nodded, and she carefully extracted the contents, reading through each document with methodical precision. I watched her face for reactions, a slight narrowing of the eyes at the financial records, a small nod at Richard's letter to the board. This is compelling, she said finally, but legal proceedings are complex, especially with succession challenges. Brad will fight. He'll claim Richard changed his mind. He'll drag it out. How long? Months, possibly years. My heart sank. Whitson won't survive years. Brad's already gutting it. Clients are leaving. People are being fired. Harriet nodded, understanding immediately. Then we need leverage. Something immediate, something public. The financial records? Suggestive, but not conclusive. We need more. She leaned forward. Tell me about Brad's current management of the company. Any questionable decisions? Financial irregularities? I thought back to Maria's comments about burning cash, the lost clients, the expensive consultants. I've been isolated, limited access. But there are rumors. Rumors won't cut it. We need evidence, concrete proof of mismanagement or malfeasance. I felt a flicker of helplessness. How could I gather evidence from my basement banishment? As if reading my thoughts, Harriet added, You still have allies in that building, Rachel. Use them. She was right. Despite my isolation, people like Maria still sought me out, still trusted me. Perhaps there were others who could help, people with access to the information we needed. If we do this, I said slowly, what's the best outcome we can hope for? Harriet leaned back, considering. With Richard's authentic will, your appointment as successor, and evidence of Brad's misconduct, the board could vote to remove him and instate you as interim CEO while the legal proceedings unfold. The possibility hung in the air between us, me, leading Whitson, fulfilling Richard's wishes, saving the company we both loved. It seemed impossible. Yet the alternative, watching Brad destroy everything, was unthinkable. What do I need to do? I asked. For the next hour, Harriet outlined a strategy. We needed financial records showing mismanagement, evidence of client loss tied directly to Brad's decisions, documentation of any ethical breaches, and most importantly, allies on the board willing to act when the moment came. How much time do we have? I asked as our meeting concluded. The quarterly board meeting is in 3 weeks, Harriet replied. That's our window. After that, Brad will have had time to replace more board members with his own people. 3 weeks to save a company 22 years in the making. It seemed impossible. As if sensing my doubt, Harriet added, Richard believed in you, Rachel. He wouldn't have chosen you if he didn't think you were capable of this. Outside Harriet's office building, I stood on the sidewalk, watching the late afternoon sunlight glint off neighboring skyscrapers. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like purpose, like hope. My phone vibrated with a calendar notification. Tomorrow was the WHT New Vision launch party, a lavish event Brad had organized at the city's most exclusive hotel to showcase the company's rebranding to clients and industry insiders. Attendance was mandatory for all employees. Perfect. It would be my first opportunity to connect with potential allies, to begin gathering the evidence we needed. I texted Maria, need to talk before tomorrow's event. Urgent. My office, 7 a.m. Her reply came seconds later. I'll be there. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with possibilities, strategies, fears. What if Brad discovered what I was doing? What if the board sided with him despite the evidence? What if Richard's faith in me had been Misplaced? By morning, doubt had been replaced by resolve. I arrived at the office at 6:30 a.m., well before Brad or his entourage would appear. The building was quiet, populated only by the cleaning staff finishing their night shift. I made my way to my basement office and waited. At precisely 7 a.m., Maria appeared in the doorway looking concerned. "Rachel, what's going on? Your text sounded serious." I gestured for her to close the door, then said simply, "I need your help, and I need to know who else we can trust." Over the next 20 minutes, I shared a carefully edited version of what I'd learned, that Richard's true succession plan had been subverted, that Brad's leadership was illegitimate, that we had a limited window to gather evidence of his mismanagement before the board meeting. Maria listened without interrupting, her eyes widening. When I finished, she sat back. "I knew something wasn't right about Brad taking over," she said slowly. "But this is bigger than I imagined. I can't do this alone," I admitted. "I need people with access to the right information." Maria nodded thoughtfully. "David in finance. He's been tracking the budget discrepancies. And Sanjay from legal. He tried to warn Brad about compliance issues with the new client contracts but was shut down. Can they be trusted? Completely? They loved Richard, and they hate what's happening to Whitson." She paused. "There's also Joanna." "Joanna Mercer? I thought she left." "Officially, yes. Unofficially, she's been consulting with our biggest client to prevent them from pulling their business entirely. She's kept in touch with several of us." Hope surged through me. Joanna had been Richard's right hand in operations, just as I had been in people management. Her knowledge of the company's inner workings was unparalleled. "Can you arrange a meeting? Somewhere private?" Maria nodded. "Tonight, after the launch party. I'll text you details." As she rose to leave, I caught her arm. "Maria, this is risky. If Brad finds out, what's he going to do? Send me to the basement?" She smiled, but her eyes were serious. "This company was special once. It can be again. I'm in." After she left, I sat back in my creaky chair, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. In my 22 years at Whitson, I'd navigated reorganizations, market downturns, and difficult clients. But I'd never led an operation like this, gathering intelligence, building alliances, preparing for a confrontation that would determine the company's future. Yet somehow, in that moment, I felt more like myself than I had in weeks. This wasn't about my wounded pride or lost status. It was about protecting what Richard had built, about honoring his legacy. Tonight would be the first step. I would attend Brad's gaudy rebranding party, smile politely, and begin the quiet work of reclaiming Whitson, one ally at a time. Little did I know that the launch party would bring revelations far more damning than I could have imagined. The WHT New Vision launch party was exactly as ostentatious as I'd expected. Brad had rented out the entire rooftop terrace of the Elysian Hotel, one of the most expensive venues in the city, and transformed it into what he called a multi-sensory brand experience. Projection mapping turned the space into a shifting canvas of abstract patterns that matched the new corporate colors. Servers in custom WHT-branded outfits offered molecular gastronomy creations that looked beautiful, but left guests still hungry. A DJ booth occupied one corner, though the music remained low enough for networking. One small mercy. I arrived precisely on time, dressed in a simple black dress I'd worn to countless company functions over the years. As I stepped onto the terrace, I felt acutely aware of my outsider status. 6 weeks ago, I would have been greeting guests, introducing clients to team members, ensuring everything ran smoothly. Now I was barely an afterthought. Brad stood near the Owadii, center of the terrace, surrounded by his usual entourage, plus a cluster of people I recognized as industry influencers and potential clients. He wore a white suit that caught the changing lights, making him appear to glow as he gestured animatedly. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but the group laughed on cue. I scanned the crowd for familiar faces, allies in our nascent resistance. David from finance stood near the bar, nursing what appeared to be club soda. Maria was engaged in conversation with a client representative, her professional smile firmly in place. I didn't see Sanjay from legal, but the crowd was thick, the lighting dramatic and disorienting. "Rachel Whitman, they let you out of the basement." I turned to find Tyler, Brad's self-proclaimed executive strategist, watching me with barely disguised amusement. Up close, he looked even younger than I'd initially thought. maybe 26, with the carefully cultivated stubble and designer glasses that seemed standard issue for Brad's team. Tyler, I acknowledged with a polite nod. Lovely event. Isn't it? Brad's vision in tangible form. He gestured grandly at the space. Disruption, innovation, the future. Impressive, I agreed, though what I was thinking was excessive, wasteful, and completely disconnected from what our clients actually value. Tyler tilted his head, studying me. You know, Brad was surprised you didn't quit. Most people would have after being publicly humiliated and banished to the basement, after having everything they'd worked for stripped away. I've been with Whitson for 22 years, I replied evenly. I care about this company. Something flickered across Tyler's face. Surprise, perhaps even a hint of respect, but it vanished quickly. WHT, he corrected. We're WHT now. New name, new era. Of course, I said, taking a sip of my sparkling water. Tell me, how are the new client acquisitions going? I heard the Meridian account was looking promising. It was a calculated question. Meridian Global had been in talks with Whitson before Richard's death, a potential 7-figure account that would have been transformative. Tyler's smile faltered slightly. We're in advanced discussions with several major players. Can't share details, obviously. Confidentiality. Translation. The Meridian deal was dead. Another casualty of Brad's. Leadership. Before Tyler could change the subject, a commotion near the entrance caught our attention. A woman had arrived, tall, commanding, dressed in a tailored burgundy suit that stood out amid the sea of fashionable black. Joanna Mercer, our former COO. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Employees who had worked with Joanna moved toward her, eager to reconnect. Clients who knew her reputation did the same. Even Brad seemed momentarily thrown off balance, his animated gestures faltering as he registered her presence. What is she doing here? Tyler muttered, more to himself than to me. It's a client event, I replied innocently. And Joanna maintains relationships with several of our largest accounts? Tyler shot me a suspicious look, then excused himself to confer with Brad, who was, now watching Joanna with an expression caught between annoyance and concern. I made my way casually through the crowd, greeting former colleagues, exchanging pleasantries with clients who remembered me. All the while, I was gathering information, snippets of conversation about delayed projects, budget overruns, confusion over the company's new direction. The picture emerging was exactly as Maria had described, chaos beneath a glossy surface. Eventually, I worked my way to where Joanna stood chatting with the CEO of Prescott Media, one of our oldest clients. Rachel, she said warmly as I approached, embracing me as if we'd seen each other just yesterday instead of 6 weeks ago. I was hoping to catch you tonight. After exchanging pleasantries with the Prescott CEO, who excused himself to get a drink, Joanna linked her arm through mine and guided me toward a quieter corner of the terrace. You look good, she said, studying me intently. All things considered. Basement dwelling agrees with me, apparently. Joanna's expression darkened. What Brad's done is unconscionable. To you, to the company, to Richard's legacy. Maria mentioned you've been in touch, that you've been helping behind the scenes. She nodded, trying to salvage client relationships. It's not easy. Brad's team has no understanding of the expectations we've established over years. They're missing deadlines, changing deliverables without consultation. We're gathering evidence, I said quietly. For the board meeting in 3 weeks, we have information that could change everything. Joanna's eyes widened slightly, but she controlled her reaction, aware we were in a public setting. Maria mentioned something cryptic. I didn't realize it was this significant. It is. We need your help. Your knowledge of operations, client relationships, financials. You have it, she said without hesitation. Whatever you need. Tonight. After this. Maria's arranging a meeting. Joanna nodded subtly, then plastered on a smile as someone approached. Richard always said you were the backbone of Whitson. I'm beginning to think you might be its heart as well. The rest of the evening passed in a careful dance. I circulated, reconnected, gathered information. Brad gave a presentation, all flash, no substance, unveiling the new WHT brand identity to tepid applause. I noted which board members were present and which were conspicuously absent. I observed which clients engaged enthusiastically and which stood back, watching with evident skepticism. Most importantly, I watched Brad. Behind his confident facade, I could see the strain. He checked his phone constantly, had hushed arguments with Zach and Mia, drank more champagne than was advisable for someone giving a keynote presentation. Something was wrong in Brad's perfect new world. At 10:30 p.m., I received a text from Maria. Coffee shop on Franklin. Back room. 30 minutes. I made my exit quietly, offering bland excuses about an early morning. As I waited for the elevator, I sensed someone behind me and turned to find Brad himself, slightly flushed from champagne. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his tone conversational, but his eyes sharp. "The party's just getting started." "Early morning," I replied evenly. "The documentation project has tight deadlines." "Right. The documentation." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You know, Rachel, loyalty is an admirable quality, to a point. But there comes a time when it's better to recognize when something is over, when it's time to move on." The elevator arrived with a soft chime. I stepped inside, turning to face him. "I couldn't agree more, Brad. Some things are indeed over. The question is, what comes next?" The doors closed on his puzzled expression. 20 minutes later, I entered the coffee shop on Franklin, a small, independent place that stayed open late for the theater crowd. The main area was quiet, just a few customers lingering over laptops. The barista nodded toward a door at the back without my having to ask. The private room beyond was small but comfortable, with mismatched armchairs and soft lighting. Joanna was already there, along with Maria, David from finance, and Sanjay from legal. They looked up as I entered, their expressions a mix of determination and uncertainty. "Thank you for coming," I said, taking the remaining chair. "I know there's risk involved." "We're past worrying about risk," David replied, his usually mild manner hardened by weeks under Brad's regime. "The company won't survive another quarter at this rate." Sanjay nodded in agreement. "The new contracts Brad's team has been pushing are legally questionable at best. I've tried to flag the issues, but they just go around me." "It's worse than that," David added, pulling out a tablet. "I've been tracking the financials. The rebranding costs alone are triple what was budgeted. The new office renovation has no spending cap, and there are these." He pulled up a spreadsheet and turned it so we could see. "Payments to companies I can't trace. Large payments." Joanna leaned forward, scanning the numbers. "CX Global Partners, Velocity Ventures, these aren't vendors I recognize." "They're not real companies," David said quietly. "I've checked every database. They exist on paper only, with P.O. boxes for addresses." The implication hung in the air. Brad wasn't just mismanaging the company. He was potentially embezzling from it. "We need more," I said finally. "Concrete proof these entities connect back to Brad." "I might have something," Sanjay offered. "Last week, I was asked to notarize a document for a strategic partnership. I noticed the signatory for the partner company was Eliza Callahan." "Brad's sister," Joanna confirmed. "I made a copy," Sanjay continued, producing a folder. "It's for a brand strategy consultancy called Nexus Creative. They're being paid $200,000 for services that are never clearly defined." I thought back to the documents in Richard's envelope, the evidence he'd been gathering about Brad's previous financial misconduct. This was the same pattern, just on a larger scale. "This is good," I said. "But we need more. Emails, records of transfers. Anything that proves Brad is knowingly directing company funds to shell corporations connected to him or his family." Joanna leaned back, her expression thoughtful. "There's someone else who might help us. Someone with complete access to Brad's communications." "Who?" Maria asked. "His assistant, Parvati. She's new, hired after I left. But word is she's becoming disillusioned. Apparently, Brad treats her terribly." I considered this. "Can we trust her?" "I've spoken with her a few times when calling about client matters," Joanna replied. "She's professional, competent, clearly overqualified for an assistant role, and increasingly unhappy. I'll reach out to her," I decided, carefully. For the next hour, we strategized. David would continue tracking the financial irregularities. Sanjay would document the questionable contracts and regulatory concerns. Maria would gather evidence of client dissatisfaction and project failures. Joanna would speak with key clients about their experiences under the new management. And I would approach Parvati, potentially our most valuable ally, but also our greatest risk. As the meeting concluded, Joanna held me back as the others left. "There's something else," she said, her voice low. Something I didn't want to mention in front of the others until we're certain. What is it? A rumor. That Brad is looking to sell WHT. That this whole rebranding exercise isn't about growth. It's about making the company attractive to buyers. I felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath me. Sell? To whom? Gentech Media. They've been trying to acquire design firms to build out their creative division. Richard would never have sold to Gentech. They're known for acquiring companies, stripping their assets, and discarding the remains. Joanna nodded grimly. Exactly. If this rumor is true, Brad isn't just damaging the company. He's preparing to liquidate it entirely. The implications were staggering. Not just jobs at stake, but Richard's entire legacy. Everything he'd built, everything he'd stood for, gone in a corporate fire sale. We need to move faster, I said, a new urgency in my voice. The board meeting may be too late. As I left the coffee shop, the weight of our situation pressed down on me. We were no longer just fighting to restore proper leadership. We were racing to save Whitson itself from extinction. The following Monday morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The building was quiet, the lobby empty save for the security guard, who nodded at me with the vague recognition of someone who'd seen me enter this building for decades, but never actually spoken to me. I had a mission: to find and speak with Parvati Sharma, Brad's executive assistant. According to Joanna, Parvati typically arrived by 7:30 a.m. to prepare for Brad's day, well before Brad himself, who rarely appeared before 10 to Maus. Instead of going directly to my basement office, I took the elevator to the executive floor. It felt strange being there again. The hushed carpet, the subtle lighting, the wall of glass overlooking the city. This had been my domain once, a place where I moved with confidence and purpose. Now I felt like an intruder. The executive area had been redesigned like the rest of the building, all white surfaces and minimalist furniture. That looked striking in photographs but uncomfortable in practice. Brad's office door was closed, but light spilled from beneath it. Someone was already inside. I approached cautiously. The nameplate on the door no longer read, Richard Whitman, founder and CEO. It now displayed, Bradley Callahan, visionary chief executive, in sleek, modern font. I knocked softly. Come in, called a woman's voice, precise, professional. I opened the door to find a young woman seated at a desk in Brad's outer office. She looked to be in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, wire-rimmed glasses, and an expression of focused competence. She glanced up from her computer, clearly surprised to see me. Ms. Whitman, she said, recognizing me immediately. Good morning. Good. Morning, I replied, closing the door behind me. Parvati, isn't it? Yes. She seemed uncertain how to proceed, likely wondering what the exiled former HR director was doing in the executive suite at 7:15 a.m. Mr. Callahan isn't in yet. He has a breakfast meeting at 9:30. Actually, I came to speak with you. I moved closer to her desk, keeping my voice low despite the empty office. Do you have a moment? Wariness crossed her features. Regarding? I made a split-second decision. Time was too short for careful groundwork. Regarding Brad's plan to sell the company to Gentech Media. Parvati's expression didn't change, but her fingers paused over her keyboard, a momentary hesitation that told me everything. She knew. I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about, she said, carefully. And if I did, it would be confidential information. Of course, I nodded understandingly, just as the payments to shell companies owned by Brad's family members are confidential, and the discussions about laying off 30% of the staff after the deal closes. That got her attention. Her eyes widened slightly before she controlled her reaction. Ms. Whitman, I don't think... Please call me Rachel. I sat in the chair opposite her desk. I understand your position. You're new. You're loyal to your boss. You signed NDAs. But I think you also care about doing the right thing. Joanna Mercer mentioned you seemed concerned about recent developments. Parvati glanced toward the door, then back at me. I have a meeting to prepare for. I'll be brief. You know what's happening here isn't right. Brad is dismantling a company that took decades to build. People who've dedicated their careers to Whitson are being discarded. And if the Gentech sale goes through, dozens more will lose their jobs. These are business decisions, she said, but her tone lacked conviction. Companies evolve. This isn't evolution, it's destruction, and possibly fraud. I leaned forward, holding her gaze. Parvati, I worked alongside Richard Whitman for 22 years. He built this company on integrity, innovation, and genuine care for both clients and employees. What Brad is doing dishonors everything Richard stood for. Something shifted in her expression, a softening, a moment of uncertainty. Why are you telling me this? Because we're gathering evidence for the board. Evidence of Brad's mismanagement, his financial improprieties, and his plan to sell the company against the interests of its stakeholders. And you have access to information that could be crucial. Parvati was silent for a long moment, weighing her options. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. The Gentech deal is real. Term sheets have been drafted. Brad plans to announce it after securing board approval at the quarterly meeting. My heart sank, though I'd suspected as much. And the layoffs? 50% of current staff would be terminated within 3 months of the acquisition. It's in the integration plan. The WHT name would be absorbed into Gentech's brand within 6 months. Complete erasure. Not a trace of Whitson would remain. Parvati, we need your help, emails, documents, anything proving Brad's misconduct or the true nature of the Gentech deal. She shook her head slightly. That would be a violation of my employment agreement. I could be sued, blacklisted. I understand the risk, but sometimes there are more important things than job security. I reached into my bag and pulled out a copy of Richard's letter, the portion describing his vision for the company, his concern for its future. I slid it across the desk. This is what the company's founder wanted for Whitson, not to be sold off in pieces, not to be stripped of its identity. Parvati hesitated, then picked up the letter, scanning it quickly. Her expression softened further. I never met Richard Whitman, she said quietly, but everyone who worked with him speaks of him with such respect, such affection. She looked up at me. No one speaks of Brad that way. There's a reason for that. Parvati seemed to come to a decision. She reached for a sticky note, wrote something on it, and passed it to me. An email address. Her personal account, not her work one. I can't promise anything, she said. But I'll think about what you've said. That's all I can ask. Stood, tucking the note into my pocket. Thank you for listening. As I turned to leave, Parvati added, Rachel, be careful around Zach. He's been asking questions about you, about your activities, whether you've been meeting with former employees. A chill ran through me. Thank you for the warning. I left the executive floor feeling both hopeful and anxious. Parvati hadn't committed to helping us, but she hadn't refused either. More concerning was the news that Brad's team was watching me. We would need to be more careful with our communications, our meetings. Back in my basement office, I emailed the others from our group with a coded message we'd agreed upon. Project documentation proceeding, archive review scheduled for Thursday. They would understand it meant we needed to meet. Again, at our alternate location, a study room Sanjay had booked at the university library where his wife taught. The next 3 days passed in a strange limbo. I continued my pointless documentation work, maintained a facade of resignation, and watched for any sign that Brad or his team had become suspicious of our activities. Meanwhile, our small resistance gathered information, prepared arguments, built our case. On Wednesday afternoon, an email arrived from Parvati's personal account. No text in the body, just an attachment, a PDF labeled Meeting Notes. My hands trembled slightly as I downloaded it, half expecting it to be empty, a sign she'd decided against helping us. Instead, I found a treasure trove. Parvati had compiled a meticulous dossier, emails between Brad and Gentech, executives outlining the acquisition plan, financial records showing payments to the shell companies David had identified, a draft board presentation that grossly misrepresented the company's performance to justify the sale. Most damning of all was an email from Brad to Zach discussing Richard's will. Ours lawyer still asking questions about original document. Stall her. Once Gentech deal closes, it won't matter. We'll all be too rich to care about ancient history. It was the smoking gun we needed, not just evidence of mismanagement or even financial impropriety, but an explicit acknowledgement that something was amiss with Richard's will. I forwarded the documents to Harriet Chen immediately, then to our core group with a message. New documentation received. Urgent review needed. That evening, my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. Rachel Whitman, I answered cautiously. It's Parvati. Her voice was hushed, tense. Are you somewhere private? Yes, what's wrong? Brad knows something's happening. He's called an emergency pre-meeting with 3 board members for tomorrow morning, the ones most loyal to him. I think he's trying to secure their votes before the full board. Meeting next week. My mind raced. For what, specifically? The Gentech deal. He wants preliminary approval to expedite the process, and… She hesitated. He's added an agenda item about your termination. So it had come to this. Brad was making his move, accelerating the timeline, eliminating potential obstacles. Me. Thank you for telling me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Is there anything else I should know? Just be careful. Zach has been going through server logs, checking emails. They know something's leaking. After we hung up, I called Harriet Chen. Despite the late hour, she answered immediately. We need to move up our timeline, I said without preamble. Brad's accelerating his plans. Harriet was silent for a moment, thinking. The full board meeting is still 6 days away. Too long to wait if he's securing votes now. What are our options? Limited, but not non-existent. 3 board members don't constitute a quorum. They can't approve major decisions without the full board, but they can make recommendations that carry significant weight. So we need to reach the other board members before Brad does. Exactly. And we need to do it now, tonight, before his meeting tomorrow. Harriet's tone was decisive. I'll contact Martin Reeves, the chairman. He and Richard were close. If anyone on the board will listen, it's him. What do you need from me? Be ready. If Martin agrees to hear us out, we'll need to present our case, clearly, convincingly, and immediately. After hanging up, I sat in my living room, staring at the wall of photos, chronicling my years at Whitson. Holiday parties, office celebrations, award ceremonies. Richard featured prominently in many of them, his kind eyes and genuine smile a constant through the decades. I won't let him down, I whispered to those images. I won't let Brad destroy what he built. My phone rang again. Harriet. Martin has agreed to meet. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., his office. Be ready with everything we have. The final confrontation was coming sooner than expected. By this time tomorrow, the fate of Whitson, and my future with it, would be decided. I barely slept that night. By 5:30 a.m., I was already dressed in my most professional outfit, a navy suit I'd worn to countless important meetings over the years. It felt like armor. I arrived at Martin Reeves's office building at 6:45 a.m., clutching a portfolio containing our evidence. The security guard directed me to the 31st floor, where Martin's assistant was already waiting, despite the early hour. Ms. Whitman, Mr. Reeves is expecting you. Ms. Chen arrived a few minutes ago. She led me to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the awakening city. Martin Reeves stood as I entered, a tall, distinguished man in his early 60s with silver hair and the careful posture of someone who'd spent decades in boardrooms. Harriet sat in one of the visitor chairs, her briefcase open on the table beside her. Rachel, Martin said, extending his hand. It's been too long. I've missed seeing you at board meetings these past weeks. His warm greeting surprised me. I'd always had a cordial relationship with Martin, but we'd never been close. Perhaps like so many others at Whitson, he'd been keeping his distance from me out of self-preservation. Thank you for seeing us on such short notice, I replied as we all took our seats. Harriet has shared some concerning information, Martin said, his expression grave. I'd like to hear directly from you what's happening at Whitson. The full story. For the next 30 minutes, I laid out everything. Brad's dismantling of company culture, the financial irregularities, the secret plan to sell to Gentech, and finally, the evidence suggesting the manipulation of Richard's will. Martin listened without interruption, his face growing increasingly troubled. When I finished, he turned to Harriet. And you have the authentic will? You're certain of its legitimacy? Beyond doubt, Harriet confirmed. Richard had it prepared and notarized in my presence. I maintained the original copy in our firm's secure files. What was presented after his death was a sophisticated forgery. Martin leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. I had concerns from the beginning. Brad's appointment seemed inconsistent with Richard's character, but the will appeared legitimate, and none of us wanted a protracted legal battle during a time of mourning. Brad counted on that, I said. He used the shock of Richard's death as cover. What's your assessment of the company's current state? Martin asked. I didn't sugarcoat it. Critical. Client relationships are deteriorating. Key talent is leaving. The rebranding has confused our market position. And, if the Gentech sale proceeds, Whitson will effectively cease to exist. Martin nodded slowly, then stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the city. For a long moment, he was silent. When he turned back, his expression had hardened into resolve. I've known Richard Whitman for 30 years, he said. We started our businesses around the same time, served on nonprofit boards together, watched each other's companies grow. He was more than a colleague. He was a friend. He paused. And I've been failing my friend these past weeks by allowing his legacy to be dismantled. Hope surged within me. Then you'll help us stop Brad? I'll do more than that, Martin replied, returning to his desk and pressing the intercom. Janet, please initiate Protocol 447. His assistant's voice came. Through immediately. Yes, sir. Right away. Martin turned back to us. Protocol 447 is an emergency board action. It allows the chairman to convene the board within 2 hours for matters of urgent fiduciary concern. My eyes widened. The entire board? Today? 9 a.m., this office. Martin's tone was decisive. Brad's pre-meeting with his allies won't happen. Instead, he'll be facing the full board with all this evidence before him. He gestured to our documentation. I'll need copies of everything. Harriet produced a thumb drive. It's all here. Financial records, emails, the Gentech deal terms, and copies of both wills. The authentic one and the forgery. Martin took it, then turned to me. Rachel, are you prepared for what comes next? If the board acts on this information, which I believe they will, there will be significant upheaval, and you, according to Richard's true will, would be named interim CEO during the transition period. The reality of it hit me fully for the first time. Not just stopping Brad, but stepping into Richard's shoes, even temporarily, was a daunting prospect. I'm ready, I said, finding certainty in the words as I spoke them. For Richard. For Whitson. For all the people who've poured their hearts into building something meaningful. Martin nodded, satisfied. Then we have work to do before the board arrives. The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. Martin's assistant made copies of our documents for each board member. Harriet outlined the legal implications and potential actions. I prepared a brief presentation on the company's current state and immediate priorities for stabilization. At 8:45 a.m., board members began arriving, some confused, others concerned by the urgent summons. By 8:55, 11 of the 12 had assembled in Martin's large conference room. Only Brad was missing. At 8:58, my phone buzzed with a text from Parvati. He knows something's wrong. Just left office heading your way. Furious. I showed the audio wow message to Martin, who nodded grimly. Good. Let him come. At precisely 9 a.m., Martin called the meeting to order, briefly explaining that urgent information had come to light requiring immediate board attention. He had just begun distributing our evidence packets when the conference room door burst open. Brad stood in the doorway, face flushed with anger. Behind him hovered Zach, looking uncertain. What the hell is this? Brad demanded, glaring at Martin. I had a meeting scheduled with Peterson, Wilcox, and Devi this morning. That meeting has been superseded by full board action, Martin replied calmly. Please take a seat, Brad. We were just reviewing some concerning documentation. Brad's eyes darted around the room, landing on me with a flash of recognition and fury. What is she doing here? She has no place at a board meeting. On the contrary, Harriet interjected, standing. According to Richard Whitman's authentic will and succession plan, Rachel has every right to be here. What are you talking about? Brad's voice rose. I've already presented Richard's will. The matter is settled. Is it? Martin gestured to the packets before each board member. Page 1. Please, everyone. The sound of rustling paper filled the room as the board members opened their packets. Expressions of shock and confusion spread across faces as they viewed the evidence. This is a comparison of 2 documents, Martin explained. On the left, the will that was presented after Richard's death, naming Bradley Callahan as successor. On the right, the authentic will maintained in the secure files of Chen and Michael's Law, naming Rachel Whitman as interim CEO with a detailed succession plan. This is absurd, Brad sputtered. A forgery. A desperate attempt by a disgruntled employee to... The authentic will has been verified by multiple forensic document specialists. Harriet cut in. As have Richard's signatures. The forgery is sophisticated but detectable under expert examination. Please continue to page 2, Martin directed the board. Evidence of financial irregularities under Mr. Callahan's leadership, including payments to shell companies linked to his family members. Brad's face paled. Those are legitimate business expenses, strategic partnerships. With companies that don't exist? I asked quietly. Page 3, Martin continued relentlessly. Emails regarding the planned sale of WHT, to Gentech Media, a transaction never disclosed to this board despite its material significance. The room had gone deadly silent. Board members flipped through pages with increasing alarm, occasionally glancing up at Brad, whose confident facade was crumbling by the second. "This is a witch hunt," he finally said, his voice strained. "A conspiracy by old guard employees resistant to necessary change. I've been modernizing an outdated company, making it competitive in today's market." "By selling it off?" asked Diana Patel, one of the longest-serving board members. "Without board knowledge or approval?" "The Gentech discussions are preliminary," Brad insisted. Nothing had been decided. "That's not what these email exchanges suggest," Martin replied, flipping to a specific page in his packet. "Once the board rubber stamps this at the quarterly, we'll be home free." "Your words, Brad," to Gentech's CEO. Brad's expression hardened. He turned to me, eyes blazing. "You did this. You couldn't accept change, couldn't accept that your time was over, so you fabricated this fiction." I met his gaze steadily. "I didn't fabricate Richard's letter, hidden where only I would find it. I didn't fabricate the financial records showing your misappropriation of company funds. And I certainly didn't fabricate the emails where you discuss manipulating Richard's will." A gasp rippled through the room. Martin directed everyone to the final pages, the email exchange between Brad and Zach discussing the original document and how it won't matter after the Gentech deal closed. Zach, still hovering near the door, went pale. "Brad, you told me that was about an old contract, that the lawyer was confused." Brad shot him a venomous look. "Shut up, Zach." But the damage was done. The board had seen enough. Martin cleared his throat. "I believe we have sufficient evidence to take immediate action. I move that Bradley Callahan be removed as CEO of Whitson Design Group, effective immediately, pending full investigation of these allegations. Further, that in accordance with Richard Whitman's authentic will and succession plan, Rachel Whitman be appointed interim CEO during the transition period." "I second the motion," said Diana Patel without hesitation. "All in favor?" Martin asked. 11 hands raised. Only Brad's ally Peterson hesitated, then, seeing the unanimity of his colleagues, slowly raised his hand as well. "The motion carries unanimously," Martin declared. "Brad, please surrender your company credentials and access to Ms. Whitman. Security will escort you from the building." Brad stood frozen, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. Then, with a sudden burst of fury, he swept his hand across the table, sending documents flying. "This company was dying before I came along," he shouted. "Stuck in the past. Irrelevant. I was its only chance at survival." "No, Brad," I said, rising to my feet. "Whitson wasn't dying. It was thriving through integrity, quality, and genuine relationships. Things you never understood. Richard built something meant to last, not to be stripped for. Parts and sold off." Security arrived, summoned discreetly by Martin's assistant. Brad, seeing his position was untenable, straightened his jacket with a forced dignity. "You'll regret this," he said, looking around the room. "All of you. When your precious Whitson fails in the modern market, you'll wish you'd let me save it." As security led him away, the boardroom fell silent. Then Diana Patel turned to me. "Well, Rachel, it seems you have a company to run." The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders. Not a burden, but a purpose. A chance to honor Richard's legacy. To rebuild what had been broken. "Yes," I replied. "We have a company to save." The next 3 months were the most challenging and rewarding of my professional life. Stepping into the role of interim CEO during a company crisis required every skill I'd developed over 22 years, plus many I had to learn on the fly. My first day began in Richard's office. My office now, at least temporarily. I stood in the doorway, taking in the space Brad had transformed. The sleek, impersonal furniture, the meaningless art, the cold, clinical atmosphere. "We'll need to change this back," I said to Joanna, who stood beside me. I'd asked her to return as COO, and to my relief, she'd accepted immediately. "The whole office? That's a lot of work when we have so many pressing issues." I shook my head. "Not the whole office, just this room, the heart of Whitson. It needs to feel like Richard again." That afternoon, amid crisis meetings and damage control, I took 30 minutes to visit the company's storage facility. There, wrapped carefully in protective coverings, were Richard's original furnishings: the cherry desk, the comfortable chairs, the bookshelves, even the Boston fern, now somewhat worse for wear, but salvageable. "Bring it all back," I instructed the facilities team. By tomorrow morning. It might have seemed trivial amid the company's larger challenges, but symbolism mattered. The office wasn't just a workspace. It was a statement about values, about continuity, about honoring what came before while moving forward. The early days were a whirlwind. We had to stabilize client relationships first. Many were on the verge of leaving after weeks of Brad's mismanagement. Joanna and I personally called every major client, explaining the leadership change, addressing concerns, and in some cases, negotiating revised timelines for delayed projects. Next came the staff. Brad's vision had left deep wounds in the company culture. Talented people had been marginalized or driven out. Trust had been broken. Morale had cratered. I began with a company-wide town hall, honest, transparent, and held in the central atrium rather than live-streamed or confined to a conference room. I stood among the employees, not on a stage. Whitson is returning to its roots, I told them, not because we're afraid of change or innovation, but because our foundation, the values Richard built this company upon, is stronger than any trendy rebrand. The relief in the room was palpable. People who had been walking on eggshells for weeks finally relaxed. Questions came freely, and I answered each one. Honestly, even when the answer was, "I don't know yet," or "We'll need to figure that out together." The real work began afterward. We established a recovery team comprising both veteran employees and newer voices. We audited every decision Brad had made, keeping those with merit, there were a few, and reversing those that undermined our core strengths. We reached out to employees who had been fired, or who had resigned in protest, inviting many to return. Maria took on expanded responsibilities in client services. David was promoted to CFO after the thorough financial audit he led uncovered and rectified all of Brad's irregular transactions. Sanjay joined the executive team as general counsel, and Parvati, whose courage had been instrumental in our success, became my executive assistant and was enrolled in our management training program at her request. The WHT rebranding was quietly shelved. The Whitson Design Group name and original logo returned, with subtle updates that honored our heritage while acknowledging the need for evolution. The garish office renovations were modified, keeping elements that genuinely improved functionality while restoring the warmth and humanity that had always characterized our workspace. Not everything was smooth sailing. The legal aftermath of Brad's tenure was messy. He threatened lawsuits, made public accusations, attempted to poach clients. Harriet Chen handled it all with surgical precision, and eventually, faced with overwhelming evidence of his misconduct, Brad accepted a settlement that required his silence and cooperation with authorities investigating the financial improprieties. The board established a search committee for a permanent CEO. The role was technically still interim for me, though many assumed I would be the natural choice. But I had been doing some soul-searching about my own path forward. 3 months after the board meeting that changed everything, I sat in Richard's restored office, my temporary office, gazing at his Boston fern, now thriving again in the corner by the window. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called. Martin Reeves entered, smiling as he looked around the space. "It feels right in here again, like Richard could walk through that door any minute." "That was the idea," I replied, gesturing for him to sit. "What brings you by, Martin?" "The search. Committee meeting isn't until next week." "Actually, that's why I'm here." He settled into the chair across from me. "The committee has completed its initial evaluation. We've reviewed internal and external candidates, conducted preliminary interviews, and we've reached a unanimous recommendation." My heart beat a little faster. Despite the challenges, these months leading Whitson had been deeply fulfilling. I'd discovered strengths I hadn't known I possessed. "Before you continue," I said, "there's something I need to share." Martin looked surprised but nodded for me to proceed. "I've been thinking about my role here, both the interim position and potentially the permanent one, and I've realized something important." I took a deep breath. My greatest contributions to Whitson have always been about its people, its culture, the human elements that make this company special. "That's certainly true," Martin agreed. "Your leadership these past months has restored the soul of this place." "Thank you. But I've also realized that my passion isn't for quarterly projections or market expansion strategies. It's for building an environment where creativity and humanity flourish." I straightened in my chair. "Martin, I don't want to be the permanent CEO." His eyebrows rose. "I must say that's unexpected. You've done remarkable work in the role." and I've been honored to do it. But the right next step for Whitson, and for me, is different. I'm proposing a new position, Chief People and Culture Officer. Not just HR, but a comprehensive role focused on maintaining what makes Whitson special while allowing us to evolve and grow. Martin studied me for a long moment. You're certain about this? Completely. I've drafted a job description for both positions, the CEO role and this new one. I believe Joanna would be an excellent CEO candidate with her operational expertise and deep understanding of our business. But ultimately, that's the board's decision. Well, Martin said, looking bemused, this changes our recommendation somewhat. The search committee was prepared to offer you the permanent position. I'm flattered, truly, but this feels right to me. Martin nodded slowly. Richard always said you knew your own mind. He respected that about you. He rose to his feet. I'll take your proposal to the committee. For what it's worth, I think it has merit. 2 weeks later, the board approved both proposals. Joanna Mercer was named CEO of Whitson Design Group. I became the company's first Chief People and Culture Officer, with a seat on the executive team and a mandate to preserve and evolve the human-centered approach that had always been our strength. My first official act in the new role was to transform my basement exile into something meaningful. The space was renovated, not into another sterile conference room, but into the Foundation, a small museum celebrating Whitson's history and values. Richard's original sketches, photos from company milestones, and testimonials from long-term clients lined the walls. In the center stood the old filing cabinet where I'd found his letter, preserved as a reminder that sometimes what seems like an ending is really a new beginning. 6 months after Brad's removal, Whitson hosted a 23rd anniversary celebration. The company had not only stabilized but begun to thrive again. We'd retained all but 2 major clients, rehired most of the talent that had been lost, and even secured several significant new accounts drawn to our renewed reputation for quality and integrity. During the Mai celebration, held in our central atrium, I found a quiet moment to stand before a newly commissioned portrait of Richard that hung in a place of honor. We did it, I whispered to his smiling image. We saved what you built. Talking to Richard again? Joanna's voice came from behind me. He'd be proud of what you've accomplished. What we've all accomplished, I corrected. It took every one of us who believed in his vision. Joanna nodded toward the gathering, employees old and new celebrating together. The company feels like itself again. Better, maybe. Stronger for having weathered the storm. That's how good foundations work, I replied. They don't just support you in calm weather. They keep you standing when the winds are strongest. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, I found myself back in my new office, a bright, welcoming space on the executive floor, with windows overlooking the city and plenty of plants, including a cutting from Richard's Boston fern that now had offspring throughout the building. On my desk sat a small, elegant wooden box, a gift from the staff, presented earlier in the evening. Inside was a plaque engraved with words I'd spoken during the darkest days of Brad's tenure, now adopted as an unofficial company motto. Power can be inherited, but respect must be earned, and when you bury someone who built the foundation, don't be surprised when they rise stronger than before. I traced the words with my finger, thinking of the journey that had brought us here, the humiliation of the basement office, the discovery of Richard's letter, the gathering of allies, the confrontation with Brad, the rebuilding of what had been broken. In trying to erase me, to bury me in that basement, Brad had inadvertently positioned me exactly where I needed to be to discover the truth. In attempting to destroy Richard's legacy, he had ultimately ensured its preservation and renewal. Sometimes, I reflected, the most powerful act isn't seeking revenge against those who wrong you. It's simply standing firm in your principles, gathering those who share your vision, and rebuilding what matters, brick by brick, relationship by relationship, value by value. Richard understood that. Now, I understood it too. I closed the box gently and turned off my desk lamp. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to strengthen the foundation Richard had built and that we had all worked so hard to preserve. But for tonight, it was enough to know that what had been broken had been made whole again. Different, perhaps, but stronger at the mended places. As I left the building, I paused in the lobby, looking up at the restored Whitson logo illuminated above the reception desk. Not a relic of the past, but a beacon for the future. A reminder that some things, integrity, community, purpose never go out of style, and that foundations, when built with care, can weather any storm.